How's it going, guys? So for today's video, it's going to be a little bit different. I'm going to be trying to share with you almost everything I know about this game. Obviously, I won't be able to cover everything, but hopefully this will be a good resource for those who are brand new to the game or maybe you just want to learn a bit more about the game. For today's drink, I'm drinking Yao's White Gourd drink. Now, I never had this one in particular, but I've had their soy milk, which is like really good. So let's just give it a try right now. Okay. Cheers. Oh wow, this is actually really good. Yeah, I'll definitely recommend this. I'll put a link. I'm not sponsored, but I'll put a picture in the video just so you guys can try it out for yourselves. So without further ado, let's get started. Where to start? Okay, I have some notes. Pull those up and let's get to it. All right. So I guess I'll start with the premise of the game. Let's say you're like brand new, you haven't even touched this game. So what is this game? Pretty much you have 5 characters. They'll go through various levels, go through some mobs, and then basically at the end you'll reach like a boss. And that's pretty much it. Then you advance to the next level. There's the boss. So after 4 waves of mobs, or 16, you reach a boss like this. And that's pretty much the premise. So now first, we'll go through what everyone probably cares the most about, which is characters. So each character, this is the character select screen. Here you'll see all your characters, their gear, and a couple other things that I'll go through. So first, let's start at the bottom here. We'll start with skills first. So each character has 4, 5, or 6 skills, and as a new player you don't absolutely have to max these out right away because it does get expensive. So what I recommend is getting them to maybe level 10 or 15 for all your skills, and then maybe max them at a later time. And so those definitely do make a big difference, especially for characters that have team buffs. I would make sure to max those out first. There's a couple characters whose skills that I would probably max out, and you may not know this, but some characters like Chloe here, she has a skill where even if she's not in the party, the amount of gold you obtain increases by 5%. So not a ton of people know about this, but she's one of the characters that I would have that skill leveled up. Another character would be, I believe, Iris. Just kidding, not Iris. It's actually Merlin and Hera. So Merlin, even if not organized, the amount of obtained experience increases. There you go. And same with Hera. She has a skill where it increases your gold by 5% when maxed. So these are great to have because even if they're not in your party, you're still getting these small gains. All right. So back to skills. So we talked about skills. Let's talk about reinforcement. Now, for an unrebirthed character, let's say you just start the game, then you're gonna start at level 1 and have a max of level 200. Let me find an example here. So Adolf, yes, he has a max of 200. I can't go any more. And in order to increase this cap, you need to do what's called rebirthing. So for example, I'll just show you an example with Chloe here. So I'll just upgrade her real quick. All right, so obviously I can't increase that anymore. It requires a rebirth. So what rebirth essentially does is increase the caps of these stats. So if I were to try and rebirth her right now, and in order to rebirth, you need at least one of these stats to be 200, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, but those are the requirements for at least one of these skills to be 200. Once you have that, then you're able to rebirth them. And all that does, it just costs some gold as well as some experience potions. So let's do, rebirth just one time. And the maximum amount of rebirths you can do per character is 300. And I know that applies for 5 stars. But here, now at rebirth, you can see that, I've increased her cap by 1. So I can do this on a total of 299 more times, at least for a 5-star. And that's how you get to a character like Kain here, who's max rebirthed, and he has stats of 500. So this is probably the one of the most common ways to really increase your character's health and defense. Another thing about rebirth is Transcendence. So what is Transcendence? You'll see here that my Kain, if you go to the stats screen, which is his first tab with the dice on it, it shows all your stats. Transcendence is essentially how many copies of that character you have. All characters start at 1, and you would get that character, get 10 more copies of them, and then you would click on this button here where you can transcend them. Obviously, he's already maxed out, so I'll just change my costume to the regular Kain. So this is who you'll start out with. He's not removable from the party, which sucks. So you just have to deal with it. And so is it worth it to upgrade him? Well, yeah, since you can't really remove him, so you might as well. And so rebirthing is more effective when you have a higher transcendence. So you'll notice that my Chloe, her stat only went up by 1 when I rebirthed her. But if if I had transcended her more, then basically you get a bigger difference every time you rebirth. All right. Next up, we'll talk about some more buttons here. So for each character, you can save presets or load presets. And what is that? So for example, if I just like to have this weapon and outfit on him and I want to save that and I don't want to have to manually change that every single time, I can save that as a preset. For example, I might just call it preset 1. That way, if I remove everything and just load preset and hit that, yeah, it's an easy way, convenient way to load and change out your character's gears. Auto equip is pretty self-explanatory. It auto equips for you, and I would not recommend it because it pretty much never does anything right. Let me check something real quick. Make sure my sound. Yep. All right. Still recording. Okay. So I would never use auto equip ever. So this button you can just use to unequip everything pretty easily. We talked about Transcendence and Shards. Now each character has this little bar here of what you call Shards. So every time you fill that up, you get 1 copy of that character. And so, for example, I'll look for someone. Okay, so here I have Robin. Now I've already transcended her 10 times, so I can't transcend her anymore. So what do you do with these extra shards? You can sell them. So you sell the shards by clicking on this plus button and then pressing sell shards, and you'll get some souls in exchange. These can be used later for upgrades and currency shops, and I'll talk about more of them later. And now costumes. So most of the 5-star characters have some form of a costume. Kain has quite a bit. These costumes usually provide a very small stat boost. I mainly get them just because I like the way they look, but the little stat boost is pretty nice. And some of them have stats that only apply when you equip them. So for example, Kain, if you equip this, then he'll become fire element, but only when you equip it. Other ones just increase your stats even if you're not equipping them. So here, for example, costume with stylish shirt, 10% defense added when possessed. That means if you possess it, the skin, you'll get the stat boost. It's different from something like this that says when equipped, then that effect of becoming fire is applied, and then when possessed, they get these stat boosts regardless of whether they're equipped or not. Now, some of you may ask, what's the first or best Kayn skin to get? That really depends. I would say either the fire or the water you can't go wrong with, simply because that added benefit of changing his element comes in handy a lot. Alright, next we'll go through the stats. So you can get to this menu by clicking any of these, and then you should be able to access the first tab here with the dice. So I'll go through all the stats and what they mean here. So attack is pretty self-explanatory, defense, health, crit rate. So with crit rate, some people will say, how much crit rate do I need to fully crit every single time? Is it 100%? And not always, because some enemies have crit resistance. So you might need 150 or 120, oftentimes more than 100% to really fully crit. Alright, crit resistance. How important is this stat? It's extremely important because otherwise, your characters will just die too easily if they get critted. The best way to combat that is to make sure you have sufficient crit resist. I'll add some numbers on the screen here. Basically, for early game, you're going to want about 30% crit resist to avoid getting crit at all. For late game raid, you need about 50%. And for late game guild territory, Dark Lord's Tower, you'll need upwards of, easily over 100%, which can be gained from, equips, character, team buffs, collection bonuses, growth stones, which I'll go into later. So just know that this is a crucial stat to have sufficiently. It can be kind of hard for new players to get, but just make sure you kind of start to think about this when you play the game or start the game. And I'll kind of show you how I get crit resist in a little bit when I go through gear. Excuse me. Alright, next we'll talk about, let's see, let me make sure my things. Cool. Okay, next, crit damage, pretty self-explanatory. Penetration, this stat's pretty important. So pretty much what this stat does is, like, if you imagine just penetrating the enemy's defenses, the more you have, the better. Every enemy has some amount of penetration resistance. So generally, if you can get 100%, that would be great. For enemies that have more than or have some form of penetration resistance, which they'll say in their immunities when you see them, you'll need more than 100%. But as a new fresh player, I would aim to have as close to, if not more than 100% if possible. You'll get this mainly through your gear. Having specific gear bonuses will grant you a lot of penetration. Or some characters might have built-in penetration into their skills. Oftentimes it's archers, some mages, so it'll just depend. Accuracy, so accuracy is important to have, especially in the mid to late game, or else you'll just miss and can't do any damage. By getting your gloves, upgrading them, those will be your main source of accuracy. For the most part, it's not really a huge concern. If you rush into the game and get really far, you might start seeing you have low accuracy. Then just upgrade your gloves. Next is evasion. Now, we used to be able to use this to pretty much cheese a lot of bosses, but now that, for the most part, that's been nerfed, you need a ridiculously high amount of evasion just to, you know, cheese a boss, it's not worth it. So you get evasion from your shoes, but really, you know, I wouldn't worry about this at all. Damage reduction, this is pretty much another form of defense almost. So the more you have, the more that enemies' damage to you is reduced. So you'll want as much as this, and you'll see that this is a focal point of a lot of your late game and mid game gear sets. Ignore damage reduction. This is how much damage reduction that you ignore off of the enemy. So enemies, bosses have some form of damage reduction against you. This will kind of ignore a little bit of theirs. And then these are just additional damages to certain elemental types. So you can get some of these through refinements, your gloves, or some skills of characters have, you know, they deal special damage to certain types. I'm not really ever worried about these stats. I do kind of keep in mind these upcoming stats, which are aggressive active skill damage. Pretty much, you know, the more you have, the more damage your skill does, and especially for skills who's do a bunch of lines, that stat actually really helps a lot. So characters whose skills have a lot of hits, like Ryu's, Megumines, you know, Kana's, a lot of the archers, Kane's ultimate, the more active skill damage you have, it helps them tremendously. Skill cooldown reduction. This is one of the most, if not the most important skill you can worry about. So the maximum you can have for most characters is 60%, the exception with Kane being 30%. You'll see that this is so important because characters whose skills, you know, they have a long cooldown, and so having that 60% reduction really makes it so that they can use their skills more frequently. You know, this helps keeps shields up more frequently, helps heals, helps damage, everything. Monster penetration, what this is pretty much, you know, imagine a character, you know, hitting one monster with their basic attack. And this applies for characters whose attacks are ranged, so like archers, mages. So for example, Mary, she'll shoot one basic attack and it'll hit one monster. Now if she gets, you know, if she wears a weapon or has a refinement that adds monster penetration like this weapon, +3. So essentially, instead of hitting one monster, they'll hit 1 + 3 more. And I'll stress this again, it only applies for ranged characters. And it's useful mainly for slasher mode when there's tons of enemies, and PvP where it will actually penetrate through multiple characters of the enemy team at once, and which is great for, you know, tearing down their blocks. And I'll go through that. I'll talk about that more in detail later in this video. Alright, so next up is affection, and affection is basically using these pots. So in Abyss mode, you'll get what's called affection potions, and they just give you a small stat boost. So here you get 1 point of attack, defense, health, accuracy, crit rate, and crit resist per potion, and the maximum that you can use per character is obviously 500. You can add them here in this little corner, and as you can see, you know, it can't improve anymore because it's maxed out. And as I mentioned before, the max amount of rebirth is 300, so that's why rebirth count is 300 times right here. So skills we've already talked about, reinforcement stats we've already talked about, and then costumes we've gone over. So let's see what is next. So yeah, stats, what to aim for. So really the main thing I would worry about is your crit resist. So early game is 30%, mid to late game really you want 50%, and no more than that. Don't waste, you know, trying to get more crit resist, because you only need 50% for raid. The only exceptions are for late game guild territory and Dark Lord's Tower, which you'll need a lot more. in which case you might have separate gear sets catered towards just crit resist lines. Alright, so lastly we'll talk about collection bonus. So, you know, the more characters you get, the more kind of bonuses you'll receive. And so this is my collection bonus. I have all the characters, and the more times you transcend them, the more enhancements you'll get. So for example, this one, only Transcendence 5 because the lowest transcended character in this bracket is 5. So I can only get 5. What about this one right here? Both these characters are maxed out, transcended, so then they get the maxed benefits from that completion bonus. Alright, that's pretty much self-explanatory. It makes quite a big of a difference, but if you're a free-to-play player, I wouldn't worry about it too much. So when you're starting out, will you want to, you know, transcend your 3 and 4 stars for sure? And if you sell your 4-star shards, you'll get what's known as rare souls, which are these yellow ones. Those are great for getting skins or additional refinement scrolls, which I'll talk about next when I talk about items. So now we'll kind of talk about what a lot of people want is gear and items. Alright, so gear, you know, you have your main weapon and then your 5 pieces of, you know, clothing or armor. Pretty simple. So with swords, you know, you have your 1, 2, 3, actually your 3, 4, and 5 stars, since this game doesn't have 1 or 2 stars. So, you know, the question is, should you, starting out, you know, really invest in your 4-star weapons? Not really. You might upgrade them a little bit, like plus 13 here, plus 15, but really what you'll quickly start to get 5-star weapons, so that's why I would say don't spend too much on 4 stars. So as you kind of start farming, maybe getting some chests, getting lucky, you'll get 5-star weapons, and with each weapon you have what's known as refinement options, basically additional lines where you can get additional stats. So for each weapon you have 3 lines of your regular options and 3 additional lines of what we call additional options. And so this is another example of my Ascalon. Here you can see how much it's been reinforced. It's plus 95. Currently the max is 99, but it's soon to be at 100. And with like characters, items can be transcended too with a maximum of 10. And as you transcend them, their passive effects will increase as well. So in this case, this passive effect, it's a small, you know, attack boost for your character. And a lot of these 5-star weapons will have unique options, so something unique about them down here. So for this weapon, you get an additional 50% boss damage and 50% crit damage, which is nice. Now, how do you know what weapon suits what character? And how do you know which weapons are worth investing in? I'll put kind of like a tier list up on the screen, but I'll kind of go through each weapon, starting with, you know, the most important, I'd say. So the S tier, I would definitely have a Manuscript of Abundance. This weapon gives bonus attack to leaf mages, mainly Lugrance right here. And she's one of the top tier characters right now because she provides team-wide healing and has lots of good team skills. So definitely one of the weapons you'll want to invest in for sure. Another one is Demon Sword. This weapon adds special attack or bonus attack for dark type characters, which there's a lot of dark type characters that you'll need to have. So just a great weapon overall. Hestia or Estia. This weapon right now it's not that great. It has the same properties as Demon Sword but applied to light characters. The only thing is the best light characters right now are like Ares, Cain. You know, there's Odin, Joan of Arc, and Darkness, but none of them are really used that much or deal quite that amount of damage. A lot of them are meant for, team buffing, like Odin and Joan of Arc. So it's not something I use too often, but if we get Zeus or someone in the near future, then it'll be a great weapon for them, I'm sure. Next up, or conversely, the other counterparts to these two are the Elaim and the Efreet. So these are used for fire characters and water characters respectively, and those are the best weapons for those. So like, for example, Megumin's greatest weapon is Efreet's sword, and Airi's best weapon is Elaim's sword because they're fire and water. Let's see. Next up is Two Great Swords. This is also one of the best swords, as it basically increases your character's damage reduction by 20% or 10%. Basically, it's a weapon that makes them tankier and survive longer. So I'll put this on someone like Mia, who benefits greatly from a high attack, but also any tank really that benefits from extra damage reduction. And I use this for Mia because Mia doesn't depend on cooldown reduction. So it's perfect just to stack it with tons of attack to help her healing, because heals in this game scale off of your attack. And so you'll see that, weapons, most of my other weapons have cooldown reduction, and I'll kind of, talk a little bit more about that in a little bit when I go over rings. But for my weapons, I typically have, 3 lines of, averaging 10%. So that'll give me 30% cooldown reduction. And my rings provide the other half. So they might give nearly 30%. So I'm just trying to get as close to 60%, if not reach 60% with the combination of the ring and the weapon. Now, if your ring kind of sucks and you haven't achieved 60%, then you may opt for, 4 lines of crit resist or cooldown reduction as this weapon here. And that's perfectly fine. I would prioritize that than worrying about something with high attack but insufficient cooldown reduction. Next up, that's S tier in my opinion, would be, I would say this is pretty high up there. It's another great DPS sword, as it provides boss damage, some crit rate, and a little bit of attack. And it's very versatile because it's just great for anyone. So I use this as kind of like one of my main DPS weapons. And similar with Ascalon, as I showed before, this one I often use on Kayn. It doesn't have any cooldown reduction on it, and Kayn doesn't need that much. So I typically put this on him because it has tons of boss damage, crit damage, and it's stacked with just nothing but attack and damage type active skill. Alright, now I'll talk about some of the lesser used weapons. This one I use sometimes, so Holy Sword Caliburn. The special thing about this is it boosts your character skill by 1. So using this on a team buffer is a good idea, and it's been buffed so that it gives the character 20% crit resist. So if you need a little bit more crit resistance, then this weapon, will be able to provide that. And it's the only one that does, I believe. And so I mainly use this for characters that have a team buff, and doesn't really rely to do a ton of damage. And again, it has plenty of cooldown reduction for whoever's going to use it. Next up are these 2 swords that have monster penetration, the Mistletoe and the Durandal. I mainly use these for slasher mode because they have that unique option of monster penetration. That helps, especially in infinite slasher mode when there's tons of enemies. And so I'll equip them on characters like Kana or Kayron, ranged characters, so this makes it so that they hit multiple monsters at once. So I have them upgraded pretty decently, not maxed out yet because slasher mode just doesn't give that many rewards, so I didn't think it was worth it. But yeah, those two I mainly use for slasher. Ancient Katana, this is a unique weapon that is useful if you're lacking accuracy, since it adds so much. So if you need more accuracy, definitely use this. You can see I've upgraded it a little bit, but now that I'm kind of in the late game and my characters have sufficient accuracy without this, then I just don't use it anymore. Here's another group of swords that are similar. So you have the Leviathan and Stormbringer, Bloodlust, Poison Blade, Kalbog. These weapons are kind of just mediocre, probably the worst of the 5 stars, and I would never really use them. So they have poor unique options like plus 15% attack. They have these miscellaneous, little bonuses that don't really help at all, like when casting or when attacking, 2% chance to cast a meteor. That's like nothing. So those weapons I would not recommend upgrading at all or using. Erendite's pretty unique because when attacking, it grants 2% chance to cast a buff that increases attack by 100%. So that is really it can be pretty useful at times and can be really pretty clutch for a very strong DPS like Ares or a warrior that hits fast. But it's not dependable, and I would not use it all the time. So it's not one of my most upgraded weapons right now. Okay, I think that covers all the weapons. So just to summarize, there's for weapons you want, ideally something like this where it's 3 lines of attack percent and then 3 lines of cooldown reduction. If you need more cooldown reduction, I would get 4 lines of them and then 2 lines of attack. That's preferable. But over the years, I've gotten some lucky lines like this, so that's kind of would be ideal. And the only weapons that are the exceptions would be like weapons like 2 great swords. Oh yeah, Excalibur. This weapon's perfect for your healers, like Yui, whose heal scales off their attack, or characters whose skills don't use cooldown reduction. Characters like Efreet or Mia or even Lugrant. So I'll often use this on Yui. I'll use it on Efreet because her CDR doesn't affect her, and when I say CDR, that's just an acronym for cooldown reduction. And then this weapon I primarily use on either Kane if I need him to survive longer, or Mia. So, and then lastly, to summarize, Book of Abundance mainly on Lugrant, and the only other Leaf Mage is Ryu. So that's who I'd recommend that for. Alright, next up are the gears. So there's a lot to unpack here. Same concepts apply. Don't invest too much in the 4 stars and just worry about the 5 stars because you'll get them soon enough. And don't worry if your combinations or your sets aren't complete. It's okay to mix and match. Eventually you'll get all the armors through just farming and leaving your phone on, so I wouldn't worry about it. I also wouldn't spend any money or currency on 5-star item chests because it's so easy to just get them with farming or over time. So those special currencies that you'll use can be spent on things like gold bars, clovers for experience pots. So anyways, so chest armor, let's see. So I'll group chest, shoes, and helmet into the same kind of family. And so, the helmet provides health. The chest base stat is defense, and the shoes base stat is evasion and boss damage. And these are the stats where you can get lines like defense, health, and crit resist, and only those 3. And you'll see that percent is always going to be better than just a flat defense or a health increase. So let me find an example. Yeah, like increased defense by 16, that's a flat upgrade. It's always better to get percentage. Now, the first question that's probably going to come to your mind is, what stats should you roll for what character? and it's going to apply to every single character the same. As I said before, you want to get that 30 or 50% crit resist, and then really the remaining lines, so these 3 lines of each item combined for a total of 9 lines. And so amongst these 9 lines, you'll want 30 to 50% crit resist, and the remainder can go into an equal mix of HP and defense. Now there's going to be scenarios where there's an exception, like you might want more health than defense, or you might want more defense than health. Generally in the late game, if your strategy revolves around shields like Vivian, then it might be better to get more defense. And in cases where you have Mia and Yui just healing her and you want to have maximum HP, in that case you might want to have more health than defense to survive longer and increase your maximum health. So you'll see, for an example here, like because my characters have 50% crit resist without any lines, mainly due to collection bonuses, your ideal stone, your growth stones being upgraded, because I'm so OP, and I don't need any crit resist lines. So what I do here, I have 3 lines of health for my helmet, 2 lines of health and 1 line of defense on my shoes, and 2 lines of health and 1 line of defense on my chest. Now it doesn't matter if I have these lines on my shoes or my helmet, they all apply the same. So you can see that in this case, my Guardian set is kind of catering towards a lot more health, which is nice in some situations, and in other situations I would have liked to have more defense. So right now it's just kind of like a close mix of each. And then that's pretty much how you handle, your helmet, chest, and shoes for every character. For your helmet and your chest, make sure to max those out because those provide defense and health. And whereas shoes, upgrading them, you only get evasion and boss damage, which is not as necessary. So you'll see that my shoes here are only 55, whereas my helmet and chest are maxed out. Now another thing to note is when your items get to level 50, they'll gain 2% damage reduction passively. So it doesn't say that anywhere, but just kind of take my word for it. As for weapons, when they reach level 50, they get 10%, I think 10% attack boost, something like that. And I think in the future patch there may be an upgrade where they upgrade the maximum level to 100, and you might get another bonus then. But between 50 and 100 there's no special bonus. So one more thing to know about these is you'll see here each item set has special effects for either 2, 3, or 5. Now, is it better to always have 5, or is it good to sometimes wear 2 of one and 3 of another? For the most part, a lot of the times it's better to have, especially for endgame players, we typically mix and match 2 of one and 3 of another, depending on the situation. Sometimes for slasher, right? If you were the complete set, all you're getting is some crit rate, right? Nothing special. But we do want this juicy 3 set bonus right here. So players might wear 3 of this to get that attack and damage reduction, and then they may wear 2 of another set, like 2 of Despair, where they may get another damage reduction buff right here and some accuracy. That might be more useful than just crit rate if your character can already crit. Okay, next up is your ring. So the ring is your major source of cooldown reduction along with your weapon. So you'll see that most of my rings here are refined for cooldown reduction, and that's all you would really go for. In some cases, it's going to be really hard to get 3 lines, especially 3 good lines. So you might have 2 lines of cooldown reduction and then 1 line of something else. That's fine. Just make sure your 2 lines are, above 10% each line, then you should be okay. And that's when you may need a 4th line of CDR on your weapon. So These are, you can see that most of these are upgraded to just level 50 or slightly more, just because they can get that 2% damage reduction passive, and I haven't really needed to go beyond that. And increasing these only increase your crit damage, which is useful, but it's better to maximize your weapon first, as well as your armor and chest. And then now lastly is gloves. So gloves, same with rings, you only really need to increase them to level 50, no more than that. Level 50 should be sufficient, and all reinforcing to them does is increase your accuracy. So I think level 50 is sufficient as far as accuracy goes. Now, what's the best refinement for them? That I don't have an answer for that. It just depends. So you'll see that, you know, some of the common, I say better refinement lines would be something like active skill damage. Of course, it just depends on if your character's skill would benefit from that. You know, something like this wouldn't benefit someone that has a haste skill. Now maybe you might have, you know, you might want some gloves for slasher mode where you want to do that additional damage to that normal monster. So I have a glove for that. Other scenarios, you may have a tank and you just want more health on them, so you go for increased health lines. For the most part, anything that gives like damage, like crit damage, boss damage, active skill damage are generally good. The ones I would probably avoid are like crit rate, because that just doesn't really help as much as the others. And maybe increase damage by, you know, these elemental types. Those are not that great either. So if you get any of those, then I would just keep on refining. All right. Now, as far as gear goes, everyone's going to ask, you know, which gear set is best for what kinds of characters? So really, by looking through all the item sets, you can kind of tell which ones are catered towards tanks or defense, and which ones are, you know, all offense. So here you can see Achilles, attack percent, crit damage, and damage type active skill, and then more attack. So obviously this is for, you know, a DPS, right? And then here looking at Guardian, you'll see something like, you know, crit damage, sure, accuracy, some attacks, some crit rates, a lot of penetration, but that reduced damage taken by 20%, that's a huge amount. So this is definitely going to make whoever's wearing it a lot more tankier. So you might put this on someone that needs a little bit more survivability, or you might have a front line that you just need to make even beefier. So they might wear the Guardian. Another defensive armor set is the Ancient Armor. You'll see that this mainly just has, you know, damage reduction and defense. Perfect for characters like Vivian. Other sets like this, you'll see, you know, has attack and penetration. Obviously, it's a DPS set. Temple Knight. This has a little bit of everything. Not bad, but nothing too crazy. And, you know, Demon set is really good. You know, attack, crit damage, penetration, just lots of damage. So that's obviously like a DPS hybrid set. Now, you know, as far as, you know, the defensive and offensive item sets go, you know, what's best for what kind of character. Now, you know, warriors, there's three different types, I guess. Yeah, there's warriors, there's your mages, archers, and your healers. Now, what's best on healers? So, like I said before, their heals scale off the attack, so you want to maximize their attack. But at the same time, they can't be too squishy, so they need a mixture of attack and some form of defense, so like damage reduction. So something like 3 slasher and 2 Achilles would be great for them. 3 slasher gives them that attack bonus right here with some damage reduction, and 2 Achilles gives them even more attack percent to help their heals. That's one example. But because these have, you know, similar properties, they both provide some offensive damage and some sustainability. it's great for everyone else, like great for archers, great for mages and warriors. Really the key thing to have for each character, and it applies for every class, is damage reduction. That's what really dictates, how beefy your character is, how much they can survive. So general rule of thumb, each character wants to have at minimum 10% or more damage reduction, and then the rest, it's okay to add in either penetration or some kind of attack. So generally, archers and mages tend to have more penetration, so they may not need sets like the dragon that has penetration in it, or they may not need a complete executioner because they already have plenty of penetration. So that might go on DPSs that already have penetration. If your character or mage is lacking penetration, you might do a mixture of dragon. So 3 dragon gives you 40% penetration. Mix that with 2 of the witch, you get another 30 penetration. And so it really just depends, I gotta say. For the most part, I'll mix and match my gear sets, and that just depends on who's the main DPS, who's in my front line. If only some of the front line gets attacked, I might put all the beefiest armor sets on them. Otherwise, if I really wanted to dive into this, I could talk about this for hours on end. So to answer your question, I would say for offensive armor sets or combinations can be applied equally to mages and archers. For example, you have Ymir and you have Kairon. They both do lots of damage, and so they would both pretty much can wear the same kind of combinations. So I would argue, the point where if someone were to say this character's best armor is this combination and that's absolute, and that's not the case. It just depends on, if you're fighting a boss with penetration resistance, maybe you need to combine something to get more penetration. If you need something just to survive longer, you might give them an ancient set. So just to go through, I'll talk about each armor set pretty briefly. So Ares armor, this is like a set you get early on. It provides a ton of attack, which is great for healers, but doesn't have much damage reduction, so it makes them really squishy. So because of that, mine's not really upgraded. Odin's set. The only good thing about this is it gives a decent amount of crit rate, but really nothing else, so mine's not upgraded. Iron Royal armor set. This doesn't have any really good stat that stands out, just a bunch of really crappy stats, so I wouldn't worry about that. Armor of Light. This one's pretty good, especially early on, because they just buffed it, so it has penetration, a decent amount of attack, a huge amount of crit rate. So this is great for any offensive mage, archer, or warrior even. Dragon armor set. The main thing about this set is it provides the most penetration. So I'll use it in guild territory or against bosses that have penetration resistance. So great armor set to have for that, but other than that, it doesn't have damage reduction, so you're very squishy. So I don't really use it for raid because penetration isn't really needed for raid. Their bosses in raid have virtually no penetration resistance, so don't worry about this armor set too much. Ancient armor sets, this one's grown on me, so it's the set that gives the most amount of defense, so I would use it exclusively for Vivian, whose shield scales exactly with defense. Next is Temple Knight set. So this one, the main benefit of this is 50% penetration when it's the 5 set bonus. This is useful, but it doesn't really have much other things going for it. And you can get penetration through other means like the Witch set, Slasher, even the Executioner, and their other stats are much better than the stats that Temple Knight Armor has. So it's great for new players, but in the end game, it's not really used for me. So mine's only level 50. White Dragon Armor Set. This set's actually really good for dealing a lot of boss damage. As you can see, the 3-set effect gives 100%, which is great. A lot of people I know have this maxed out, and all the power to them. I just haven't really upgraded this when I first started playing, so it kind of remained that way. But it's definitely one of the better armor sets out there for, you know, doing tons of damage, especially in cases where you don't need that extra penetration. You just want maximum damage output, then this is it. Demon Set. I like this one because it gives a lot of offensive capabilities for just a 2-set bonus. Having the 3-set bonus adds a decent amount of health and damage reduction, so I use the 3-set a lot to, you know, basically improve my character's sustainability. I rarely ever use the 5-set bonus, but it's there. Slasher Set. So I have this one really upgraded because it has a 10% damage reduction, and it's great. It has some added penetration too. So it's a great set for just about anyone. It's great for healers as it provides that attack and damage reduction. It's great for mages, archers, and warriors as it provides attack and penetration and that damage reduction as well. So all around, very good. I've been upgrading this for a while, so it's one of my higher ones. Next up is Witch Set. So this one I've recently started upgrading more. It's great for characters whose skills have a lot of lines because this has 150% active skill damage. And the sucky thing is you need to equip all 5 pieces for that damage reduction. So that's the only bad thing about this. But, you know, I often use a 2-set for that penetration. Rarely ever use 3-set, but I'll use 2 or 5. Guardian Set is one of the harder sets to get because you have to get this through guild territory by just battling the ancient dragon, and I can talk about that later. So you will need to slowly get this, and don't be too discouraged when it's hard to get. It takes forever to transcend because it just comes very rarely, and you can't really farm it. So you just gotta kind of take it slow. But it has a little bit of everything, and it's one of the strongest armor sets early on. And the best thing is the 20% damage reduction, as this will really make your character, you know, survive a lot longer. So I obviously maxed this out. Great for, you know, your tank. Don't really use it for, you know, my backline if they don't get hit. Mainly just for my tank or for Kane if I need them to survive. Next up is Abyss Armor. Nothing too special about this. It obviously gains the most benefits when you use it in Abyss mode, but other than that, it doesn't really have, you know, damage reduction, you know, that much going with that. You get a little bit of accuracy, defense, attack, a lot of random stuff. So nothing that I really use that often. Achilles is one of the better, more newer armor sets, so that's why mine's not upgraded that high. But I'll often use the 2-set bonus for that juicy 40% attack, and I'll use a 3-set bonus for that 10% damage reduction. If I have a DPS and I just want to maximize their damage like straight out of the bat, then I'll just use the 5-set bonus for that. So characters like Kana, Efreet, you know, anyone who just wants to dish out tons of damage with their active skill, this is the set you want to use, assuming you have sufficient penetration. Abyss of Despair is a newer one that came out. Basically, it's like a better version of Abyss. The thing I like about this is it has a lot of active skill damage. So in cases like guild territory against some bosses where you want to maximize your damage and you don't need that added penetration, then this is another one of the sets that has a lot of active skill damage and just crit damage in general. So using it on like archers, for example, like Artemis, Charon, does a lot of damage for them. And then lastly, yeah, and to pedal back onto this Armor of Despair, I mainly use a 2-set bonus for that 10% damage reduction, and I use that for like raids, especially any difficult boss. But other than that, I don't really use the 3 or 5 set. I use the 5 set if I need it for like more DPS in guild territory, but that's about it. And lastly is the newest armor set, Executioner armor. This is great for the 2, 3, and 5 set bonus. So you'll often use this 2 set to make your character tankier with that defense and damage reduction. The 3 set's nice because it gives a lot of attack, so I might use that on my healers. And then the 5 set, if you're going to use all 5, this is pretty much going to be similar or synonymous to the Guardian, except it provides a total of 15 as opposed to 20% damage reduction. And I like to split this up and use it in guild territory, whereas I may get 25% crit resist both buff to my team or my characters, whoever is using 2 sets of this, and I might have another character using a 2 set bonus of this. So if I need that extra crit resist, I'll often kind of split this up 2 and 2 for 2 characters. Alright, anyways guys, I just noticed I'm recording almost an hour, so I'm just gonna cut this video short and put it into multiple parts. So in my next videos, I'll talk about all the different items, all the different game modes, and all the overhead HUD or over the HUD stuff. So make sure to tune in for those. Those will be coming out pretty shortly. And if you have any questions at all, put them in the comment section below. I'm sure I missed some stuff, but again, hope that was useful for some of you guys, and have a great day.